All right, listeners asked for it, so let's do a deep dive on decision fatigue.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we all know the feeling, but what's the real story here?
It's more than just being tired, that's for sure.
Right, like I get to the end of the day, and even picking dinner feels overwhelming. But you've got all this research, real-world cases,
Mm.
even person stories about this.
It's a surprisingly deep topic. We'll be looking at what decision fatigue actually is, how it messes with us, and most importantly, what we can do about it.
Okay, so first things first, define it. What's the science behind this feeling?
Well, a key term is ego depletion. One of the papers you sent by David Hirschleifer and his colleagues really dives into this.
Okay, ego depletion.
Yeah, the basic idea is that our willpower, our ability to make good choices, it's not unlimited, it's a finite resource.
So like every decision we make, big or small, it's like chipping away at this reserve.
Exactly. And there's a study back in 1998 by Baumeister and his team. They actually found that people who had to make a bunch of choices showed less self-control afterwards.
Less self-control. Like they just gave up on everything.
Well, they measured it in a few ways: less physical stamina, more procrastination, and even their performance on, like, thinking tasks went down.
So making decisions actually makes us worse at other things that need brain power. That's kind of scary.
The research suggests so, yeah. And here's the wild part. It's not just everyday people. Hirsch-Leifer's paper looked at financial analysts, too.
Wait, people whose job is to make decisions? Man, that's got to be rough.
Their study found even these professionals, and judges too, are vulnerable to decision fatigue.
Oh, speaking of judges, one of the sources mentioned the hungry judge effect. What is that all about?
That's a famous study by Danziger, Levov, and Avnei Peso. It was back in 2011. They observed Israeli judges and found that, get this, they were more likely to grant parole to prisoners after a meal break.
So like a full stomach equals more leniency. That's kind of unsettling when you think about it. Makes you wonder how many other decisions are being swayed by a simple thing, like being hungry.
It definitely raises questions. There has been some criticism of that study. Another paper you sent, looking at traffic court outcomes, pointed out that the order of cases in the Israeli study wasn't random.
So maybe it wasn't just the food. Other factors could have been at play.
Yeah, potentially. But even with the criticism, it got people talking. It highlights that breaks and food might play a role in replenishing our mental resources.
Food for thought, literally. So we've talked about judges. What about other high-pressure jobs? Like I'm thinking ER doctors.
Great example. One of the sources you sent is actually by an ER physician, Marion Lee. She developed her own strategies to combat decision fatigue.
That sounds crucial in a field where every decision could be life or death. What does she do?
Well, she describes using something she calls a vulnerability score at the start of each shift. Basically, assessing how she's feeling, the ER's capacity, the kinds of patients coming in, seeing how her resources match the demands.
So it's like a mental pre-flight check before the chaos of the ER hits.
Exactly. She also uses a system to, like, risk stratify patients, which helps prioritize and use her mental energy effectively.
Makes sense. You can't afford to waste mental energy on things that can wait when lives are on the line.
Exactly. It emphasizes the importance of pre-planning and having structured ways to make decisions.
Okay, let's go back to those financial analysts for a sec. What did the research say about how decision fatigue messes with their work specifically?
Well, Hirschleifer and his team, they found the more forecasts an analyst made throughout the day, the less accurate those forecasts became.
Wait, so the more decisions they make, the worse they get at their job. This is not reassuring for the markets.
It is concerning. And it wasn't just accuracy. They found fatigued analysts were more likely to just follow the crowd or reuse old forecasts instead of thinking critically.
Yikes, that's like being on autopilot when people's finances are at stake. Okay, so we've seen how this plays out in high-pressure jobs. But what about the rest of us? We're not making life or death calls daily, but we're still bombarded with choices.
Absolutely. Even seemingly small decisions add up. Think about that anecdote from the UX Collective article you sent. That person was overwhelmed just trying to pick a t-shirt color.
Oh, yeah. They ended up buying socks instead because they couldn't deal with choosing a color. I've totally been there.
It shows how decision fatigue can lead to paralysis, impulse buys, or just settling for good enough.
It reminds me of something Steve Krug wrote in Don't Make Me Think. He talks about satisficing, where people just pick the first decent option, not the best one, because their brains are fried.
Exactly. We've all felt that overwhelm, whether it's browsing Netflix or deciding what to eat.
And this isn't just about our personal struggles. It impacts how websites and apps are designed, right?
Huge implications for user experience. Designers need to be careful not to overwhelm users with too many choices or people just bounce.
Like Netflix and its endless library. It's the paradox of choice in action.
Exactly. That's why you see more emphasis now on simplifying choices, using recommendations, and creating personalized experiences, all to reduce cognitive overload.
Okay, this is all making sense, but what do we actually do about it? Are we doomed to just make worse and worse decisions as the day goes on?
Not at all. There are some practical strategies to minimize those negative effects.
All right, let's hear them. What can we do to fight back against this mental exhaustion?
One of the best things you can do is prioritize. Make those big decisions early in the day when your mental energy is at its peak.
So tackle that important project first thing, before even checking emails.
Exactly. Another good tip is to cut down on the number of, trivial choices you have to make throughout the day.
Okay, so meal prepping for the week, having a capsule wardrobe, things like that can help free up mental space.
Totally. Routines and simplifying are your friends here. And then, of course, the basics. Taking breaks, making sure you're recharging.
So those midday walks and coffee breaks, those aren't just slacking off, they're strategic.
They're essential. And if you're dealing with a really complex task, try using checklists or a structured decision-making process.
That makes sense. Having a framework can help conserve mental energy, right?
Like a roadmap for your brain. No more wandering around aimlessly. You've got a clear path.
This is all starting to click now, feeling like I'm getting a handle on this whole decision fatigue thing.
That's great to hear. Remember, awareness is the first step. Then it's about implementing strategies and finding what works for you.
Speaking of finding what works, one of the sources, a reflection by Brad Shuck, really stuck with me. He talked about how the pandemic just amplified his decision fatigue.
Yeah, that was a time of constant high-stakes decisions for so many of us.
Exactly. Shuck realized his priorities had shifted, and he needed to, reframe his approach to making decisions.
That's a key takeaway. Sometimes it's not just about fewer decisions, but making sure the ones we do make actually align with what matters.
It's like the pandemic, in a weird way, forced us all to be more mindful about our decisions.
Possibly. It made us reevaluate what's essential, focus on the things that bring meaning and purpose.
A reset button for our decision-making compass. Man, this deep dive has given me a lot to think about.
That's what it's all about. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's about understanding the concept and how it shows up in your life.
And then making those informed choices about how we manage our energy and make better decisions, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned another study earlier about decision fatigue and traffic court.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That paper looked at outcomes in Pulaski County, Arkansas. They found judges were less likely to dismiss charges towards the end of a session.
So if I ever get a speeding ticket, I should hope my case is first thing in the morning.
Well, it's not quite that straightforward. The pattern was mainly in arraignment hearings, not trials.
Okay, what's the difference?
Arraignments are shorter, less complex than trials, quicker decisions, less evidence to weigh, less back and forth.
So more rapid-fire decisions, which would make them more susceptible to fatigue.
Exactly. In trials, where the stakes are higher and there's more time to deliberate, that fatigue effect seems less pronounced.
Makes sense. Okay, so if decision fatigue is this widespread, are there ways to actually, boost our mental resources? Make them last longer?
Beyond just simplifying things,
Researchers are looking into that. Some studies suggest there are interventions that can help. One of the papers you sent mentioned nudging.
Nudging, like subtle pushes towards certain choices.
Exactly. The idea is to guide people without restricting their freedom. And they found that nudges can be effective in reducing that cognitive burden of decision-making, especially for those complex tasks.
So a little assistance for our brains without taking away our control. I like it.
Another area of research is looking at the role of motivation and incentives. The thinking is, if we're motivated enough, we might be able to access more mental energy even when we're fatigued.
So maybe a little reward system for ourselves when we tackle those tough decisions.
It's possible. But research is ongoing, so there aren't any guarantees. What works for one person may not work for another. That's true. It seems like the best approach is to just be aware of decision fatigue, experiment with strategies, and see what sticks for you.
Absolutely. And don't be afraid to experiment. You might be surprised at what helps you conserve mental energy and make better choices.
Well, this has been eye-opening. I'm already reevaluating my own decision-making habits.
That's fantastic. Remember, small changes can have a big impact over time. And the more you practice, the easier it'll become.
Okay, so we've covered a lot on strategies, but what about the bigger picture? How does understanding decision fatigue help us live more intentionally?
Great question. This isn't just about better decisions, it's about living a life that aligns with your values. Remember Brad Shuck's reflection, how the pandemic forced him to confront his decision-making process.
It really makes you think differently about decision making, you know? It's not just about how we make choices, but the why behind them.
Exactly. Goes back to that idea of ego depletion. If willpower is limited, we should be using it for things that really matter.
It's like budgeting, but for brain power instead of money. Got to spend it wisely.
Exactly. Just like with finances, we can make choices that drain us or choices that replenish us.
So that brings up a practical question. We've talked about those strategies. Making big decisions early, simplifying choices, taking breaks. But how do we figure out which decisions are the important ones? How do we cut through the noise?
That's where understanding your values and priorities comes in. A good place to start is asking yourself, what brings me joy? Meaning purpose.
So aligning our decisions with our core values. If something doesn't fit, maybe it's not worth stressing over.
Exactly. Once you have a good sense of what truly matters, you can start making choices that reflect those values.
Makes sense, like having a filter for our decisions.
Yeah.
Let go of the stuff that doesn't align and focus on what does.
It's not about being rigid, but about having a framework, It helps you navigate that decision-making maze with more clarity.
Finding that balance between flexibility and structure. Enough freedom to make choices that feel right, but also some guidance so we don't get overwhelmed.
Right. It's an ongoing process, a journey of self-discovery. Check in with yourself regularly. Are my choices reflecting my values? Am I using my energy in a way that's good for me?
Those are great questions to consider. I think that's a perfect place for our listeners to start,
Yeah.
reflecting on their own decision making.
Totally agree. And remember, even small tweaks can make a big difference over time. It's about progress, not perfection.
Well said. This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel way more equipped to deal with decision fatigue now in my own life.
That's great to hear. I hope our listeners found it valuable too.
And to our listeners out there, keep exploring this topic. Pay attention to how decision fatigue shows up for you, try different strategies, and most importantly, make choices that align with what truly matters. Your mental energy is precious, so invest it wisely. Until next time, happy deciding.